Welcome back to another deck profile video for the 2010 Worlds format. We're going to be going over a Tyranitar PRIME deck profile today. I've been experimenting with a couple of changes to my lists based on lists from Jay Hornung and Stefan Topaco, and based on lists I've tried in the past from James G, to try and figure out the perfect way to play Tyranitar PRIME. Now I just want to state that there is no real perfect way to play Tyranitar PRIME, as it is ultimately a tier 2 deck that will ultimately struggle with different decks depending on the way you build it. However, I decided to build a variant that can address most decks I expect to see in a tournament, but it does have some notable auto losses to things like Dialga Chomp and decks like GGAMU. So just want to clarify that going in, that it's not a tier 1 deck, but it is the best I can make of this tier 2 strategy in my opinion. I'll explain the ways that other people have built it in the past while I go over my card choices in depth. Starting off, we have 3 copies of Spiritomb. Spiritomb is the real setup piece of the deck, and I don't see people use 3 Spiritomb as much as I'd like to see in this deck, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, people like faster builds that can get off sooner, and the other is that people like to run it with Machamp. We saw Tyranitar with Machamp see some success in the 2010 season at US Nationals, I believe top 32 and top 64, top 32 with Aaron Curry. And while Machamp is definitely a good choice for a partner, for anyone who doesn't know, Machamp takes out a basic Pokemon instantly, and it really kind of balances Tyranitar's very slow setup strategy with something that can get in there and just take a couple prizes. And while it is good for that, I definitely don't think it's going to win you Dialga Chomp still. That's still just a really bad matchup. And adding a Machamp line isn't going to fix it. And I think it makes winning Gardevoir, the regular Gardevoir variant, not the AMU variant, impossible if you do not play a certain tech card that is in this deck. So I decided to forego the Machamp line for a little bit of a slower build, which I do find to be very good though. Of course, Spiritomb is a keystone of this format with its Keystone Seal Pokebody, which locks trainer cards while it is in the active spot. So essentially our goal is to just set up under Spiritomb until our board is fully established. This is a deck where you want to set up 3 stage 2s, at least 2 stage 2s minimum before you are attacking. So we absolutely need that Spiritomb to lock our opponents, slow them down while we set up with its free Darkness Grace attack, which evolves one of our benched Pokemon, but puts a damage counter on Spiritomb. 3 Spiritomb means that you're more likely to start Spiritomb, and you are also more likely to be able to find Spiritomb easier early in the game to keep setting up behind it. You really do not want to break the Spiritomb lock until you are starting to swing for massive damage. So Spiritomb's here to help us set up. We can also use the Will-O-Wisp attack in this deck, which does 10. We can even make it do 20 with our special darks. So I have used that attack. I would not recommend using it that often though, as we need our attachments for our main attacker, Tyranitar. Starting off with the main line, we have 3 copies of Larvitar. I chose to go with the 60 HP Larvitar from Unleashed. There is another one from the same set with 50 HP that has much better attacks, but in a deck about survivability, the 60 HP does actually matter in some instances. You do live attacks due to that lightning resistance from Luxray, so having that extra bulk can definitely save you from getting donked early on and can really help you retreat and maybe heal that damage off later in the game. It has 2 attacks, Bite and Knuckle Punch. We cannot use Knuckle Punch, but we can use Bite. Bite is very mediocre, but 10 damage, you know, sometimes I guess can be okay. We do play a very good stage 1. We play the stage 1 Pupitar with 70 HP. There's a couple really good Pupitars in this format, in fact 3 of them, so I'm going to explain why we play this one and then the other ones in detail, why we don't play those. 70 HP is lower than the other Pupitar that most people play. We have the Pressurized Gas attack for 2 colorless energy, does 10 to each of your opponent's Pokemon. This actually synergizes nice with one of Tyranitar's attacks, so in a matchup where we want to spread to win the game, which is basically just Jumpluff, this attack can actually get you a foot ahead in the game without having to use your Tyranitar Do you really want to be attacking with Pupitar? Not really, but it is an option. And we cannot use Rock Attack when we do not play any fighting energy. The real reason you play this Pupitar is for its free retreat cost, which allows us to pivot more easily into Spiritomb. Like I said, this deck is very reliant on setting up with Spiritomb. You're going to be giving up 3 or 4 prizes before you're actually getting in there and starting to swing for damage in most games. So having that free retreat cost to pivot back into Spiritomb after a Spiritomb is knocked out is very, very important. There is other Pupitars, of course, the 70 HP one that gets free retreat when you attach to it, and it's a Pokebody. Why not just have the one that starts with free retreat and has a good attack anyway? And then there's also the 80 HP Pupitar, which is really interesting. It has the Pokebody for each energy attached to it. It takes 10 less damage, up to a -30 modifier, so you can make it live attacks. It's especially bulky, and you may think with the fact that we play this Larvitar that we're going all in on the bulk, but free retreat in this case of Pupitar is just too much to ignore, and a good attack is certainly welcome too. Moving on, we have 3 copies of Tyranitar. This was said in the Jay Hornung deck profile where he did, but we do not need 4 Tyranitar. If your opponent knocks out 3 Tyranitar, they definitely deserve to win the game as the line went. Tyranitar is massive with its just absurd 160 HP for a stage 2. This is an unboosted non-level X Pokemon with 160 HP, just absurd. But it has some crucial issues in that survivability with its ×2 fighting weakness, which is one of the worst weaknesses to have in the format. For context, for anyone new to the format, decks like Gardevoir or Gallade have the Gallade hit fighting. Decks like Lux Chomp and Dialga Chomp will have the Toxicroak G to hit fighting, and you never know, you might just run into something random like Donphan Prime around that can also hit fighting, or even Machamp. So having a fighting weakness is definitely really bad for that survivability. We'll talk about that later though. For 1 Darkness Energy, we have Darkness Howl, which does 20 to each Pokemon in play that is not Darkness type. So essentially we don't hit Spiritombs, we don't hit Sableyes, but we do hit everything else pretty much except for ourselves with the Darkness Howl attack, which is pretty good just spread damage. But unfortunately this format, spread damage is very much undermined by SP, which can heal its whole board when they level up into Garchomp, or the Nidoqueen, which heals 10 damage in between turns from a player's board. So the spread attack is generally not the route we're going for in this deck. However, against the Jumpluff deck, where their entire board is going to have 90 HP or less, you can get in there with Darkness Howl and attack 5 times and win the game by taking all 6 prizes, or getting very close and being able to finish it off with another attack. You did notice earlier that I talked about the Pupitar allowing you to attack for 10 spread. That is actually relevant, especially against Jumpluff. If you're able to attack into a Pokemon that is not fighting resistant and active, you will spread 10 to everything. I say fighting resistant because Jumpluff is. And that will actually set all their Pokemon to have 80 HP or less, which means Tyranitar can win 1 attack sooner with Darkness Howl. So it is relevant. We also have the Power Claw attack, a decent attack for Dark and Double Close, does 60, so kind of low damage output with no extra effects, but the fact is that it goes through all effects of Poke Powers, Poke Bodies, and other effects. Now, the only case where this is really applicable for Tyranitar that I can think of is if there was a wall for special energy like Shuckle from Secret Wonders, I believe it was, and the most relevant example is Dialga Chomp. Despite the fact that we have an attack that can help cleave through Dialga Chomp, it's just Dialga Chomp is still a bad matchup because of that Toxicroak. They're always able to hit weakness on us with the Toxicroak and just take massive knockouts with Expert Belt boosted Poison Revenge for, what does that do? Like an absurd amount of damage, like 170 damage. So they can pretty much always get knockouts on you, which is it's just a decent mid-range attack. I definitely wish the effect was more relevant in matchups where we could actually win. But 60 means with an Expert Belt, which will boost our damage by 20, you can take KOs on basic SP Pokemon in most stage 1s. It's just a good mid-range attack, and if you can use it to take a knockout, you will, rather than using Megaton Tail. Speaking of Megaton Tail, we have Megaton Tail for 4 energy, 2 darkness, and 2 colorless, 120. Discard the top 3 cards of your deck. Now, this is going to be our main attack. Our goal is to sit behind Spiritomb until we have 1 Tyranitar, 1 Exploud, which we'll talk about later, and maybe even a second Tyranitar set up, and then just go in for the sweep. The Megaton Tail attack is basically going to KO everything in the format, so with a little bit of buffs we can also KO even bulkier things, except of course Dialga, which is one of the few things that can live the attack. Also just fully boosted stage 2s with their own expert belts boosting their HP are not going to get knocked out. So unfortunately it doesn't knock out everything, but it does knock out just about close to everything. Our goal is to get this Tyranitar fully set up and just start swinging for one-hit KOs the second we get it going. If you're not swinging for a one-hit KO, do not swing with Megaton Tail, because milling 3 cards is definitely impactful. Definitely have to be afraid of decking yourself out. If you use the attack 6 times, you're losing 18 cards. We play 1 copy of Whismur from Supreme Victors. This is for our Explode line. Just the 60 HP is better than the other one, which has 50 HP. The attacks are okay. Tone Deaf, Flip Coin if heads, Confusion, not good at all. Roll out for 20 if hit for weakness and boosted by Expert Belt. You can actually KO a Garchomp C-level X, so it's relevant to mention, but I've never found myself using this attack. We play 1 copy of Loudred. Loudred with 80 HP has some okay attacks. 30, again, if you boost this, can do 50 with ×2 weakness, can kill a Garchomp. And 50, discard the top card of your opponent's deck, is actually somewhat decent. Again, if you boost this, this can now KO a Garchomp C-level X. I have not used these attacks, but they're relevant to mention at the very least. We're really just here for the Explode, for the 1/1/1 Explode line. Explode has the Erasing Sound Pokebody, a nice 130 HP actually on that guy, worth mentioning. Erasing Sound Pokebody removes weakness from each of your Pokemon in play. Essentially, Tyranitar's biggest Achilles heel is that biting weakness, but we can remove it. Pretty much have to do this to win against Gardevoir and even SP. The Machamp route is kind of okay, but you're never going to get a Tyranitar to take more than 1 knockout against SP if they're going to be able to KO you in return with their Toxicroak. So removing weakness is really good. And something just very understated is if you have a board of Tyranitar and Explode set up, which is what our goal is with the Spiritomb, your opponent just has a hard time answering, especially Luxchomp and Gardevoir decks. They've a lot of times used up their Psychic Cut prizes by taking them on Spiritomb knockouts, or the Luxchomp deck is just going to have to 2 to 3 hit KO your big guys, which they do not want to do. It has actually 2 really good attacks on the Explode. 40 for a double colorless, switches the opponent. Really bad switching effect, honestly, you don't really want to do that. Maybe could come up, but mainly this KOs a Garchomp C. And then we have Hyper Beam for 3 energy, does 60. Flip a coin if heads, discard energy from the defending Pokemon. It's actually a very decent attack. Also KOs a Garchomp C-level X. I know I'm going to keep mentioning that, but it is relevant because both these attacks, in fact, scale for the different stages. I have actually had a chance where I could have used Hyper Beam to make a big play. However, I was judged and I did not find my Expert Belt off of the judge. If I was able to Expert Belt it and take a knockout and a Mesprit level X, I could have had a completely different game from the one I had playing against GGAMU. So, is pretty good actually on the attacks. You can power them up in this deck since they are colorless energy, and it's pretty good. The only thing that I will say is maybe controversial about this line is how thin it is. It is only a 1/1/1 line. This means if you prize it, you are chasing it, because this deck does need Explode in most matchups. If you prize this, you're going to have to use your Azelf to go find it, which we'll talk about later. But the ability to remove weakness is just such a huge necessity for this deck, otherwise you lose. So that's why, maybe like I said, you could find a way to cut down the next line to play this in a full line. We played the middle stage evolution, that way we can also get it out under Spiritomb. That's very important to know. We have 1 copy of Nidoran. Nidoran has a nice double colorless attack that searches the deck for a supporter card, so that is pretty good if we are forced to use it. We have Nidorina with 80 HP, but does have the nice rescue attack that finds 2 Pokemon from the discard pile and puts them into your hand. In a deck where we're all about discarding, this can actually get you a late game save if you discard too many pieces with your Tyranitar. Maybe you discard your 3rd Tyranitar and you need to get it back. 1 copy of Nidoqueen. This is what we're playing the line for. Maternal Comfort removes 10 damage from your Pokemon in between turns. It does say at any time between turns, so you can in fact heal your Pokemon before poison would inflict, preventing a knockout from happening. Or you can let them get knocked out instead by doing it after. We also have the Mega Punch attack, which does 40, we can't use it, and the Ruthless Tail attack, which does 50 plus, and we can't use it. And while Nidoqueen can't attack in this deck, I think it's worth mentioning that it has a Psychic weakness that is also the other worst weakness to have in this format, would be Psychic or Colorless, but we turned that off with Exploud, so there's some solace there in Nidoqueen receiving some help from its best friend Exploud. We play Nidoqueen because Tyranitar is exceptionally bulky when the Exploud is on board, and in the rare instance when you can get Nidoqueen down with Exploud, it's very effective. But the reason you still need Nidoqueen, despite the fact that the weakness is going to be turned off and Tyranitar super hard to knock out, is for decks like Gyarados, which do not use weakness at all, and in that case, if you're not afraid of any weakness, you can just very simply set up your Nidoqueen instead of setting up the Exploud in that game. Maybe Exploud might still come in play in that game, but if they're not hitting you for weakness, you don't need the Exploud as much, so you can set up Nidoqueen. Again, if you were to make the Exploud line thicker, you would cut down the Nidoqueen line completely and just run a 2-1-2 Exploud line, and you'd get one extra free slot in the deck, which you know, you could put it towards a lot of things, but I definitely have something in mind where I would put it personally. We have 2 copies of Baltoy. Baltoy here with the Psychic typing is relevant, so we play it even though it has bad attacks. Spinning attack for 10 and quick turn for 20 times are both pretty bad, but very good at its Psychic type, so we can get free retreat with our Stadium card that we'll talk about later. Play 2 copies of Claydol from Great Encounters. Claydol has the Cosmic Power. Put up to 2 cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck and then draw until you have 6 in hand. They have still not reprinted this power because it was so good. It just helps its evolution decks set up. One relevant interaction here is that Claydol is a Poke Power, and we don't have many Poke Powers in the deck, but it's worth mentioning now. With Spiritomb, its item lock, trainer lock rather, prevents the effects of the Power Spray item card, which your opponent can play during your turn to stop your Poke Powers, but if our Spiritomb is active, they can't do it anymore. Unless you're Dialga, of course. Again, bad matchup. So, very good power, lets us draw a card, set up our board. Usually not going to have 2 on board ever in this deck, but having 1 to help you set up is really relevant. I do want to mention that with the amount of stage 2s we have, if you have a Claydol on board against a deck with Dusknoir, which would limit you to playing only 3 benched Pokemon at a time, you're going to have a Claydol, likely 2 Tyranitars, and an Exploud. You probably won't be able to fit a Nidoqueen, so just keep that in mind when you're building your board. Maybe there is a good time to sacrifice your Claydol before you start attacking so that you can have that extra board space for Nidoqueen. We play 1 copy of Uxie. Uxie from Legends Awakened has the setup Poke Power. When you play it from your hand and your bench, draw until you have 7. It's just a really nice piece to have in any deck. If we're not playing against a Dusknoir deck, we are going to have that extra bench space to use Uxie to draw some cards. So very good setup in an emergency. If you're digging for something, it's very good. It's also got the Psychic Restore attack, which does 20, and you may put Uxie and all cards attached on the bottom of your deck. Definitely relevant for clearing your board space. And with the Stadium we have that gives things free retreat, you can actually pivot this Uxie pretty easily. We have 1 copy of Azelf from Legends Awakened. This is our Azelf we were talking about with Chasing Prizes with its Time Walk Poke Power, which looks at your face-down prizes. You can choose a Pokemon you find there, reveal it and put it into your hand, and then replace the Pokemon with a card from your hand. Notably, you don't have to shuffle your prizes afterwards. You actually get to map out your prizes. In casual, this just means you look at your prizes when you take them. In a tournament, you know, you'd write down with a notepad, you know, okay, these are the prizes, these are where they are, right? But just a really good thing. We run a lot of really thin lines. Even our main line is only a 3 of line, so you're going to need that Azelf pretty much most games. From my experience, I seem to always either prize the Whismur or the Exploud, so you're going to need that if you want those. Another relevant interaction is that it can turn our basic Pokemon search into evolution Pokemon search. If we know, let's just say that we have a Tyranitar prized and we need to find it, we can use a card that finds basic Pokemon to find Azelf, which will find us that Tyranitar. So a little bit of high-level play. 1 copy of Unknown G. Unknown G with its Poke Power Guard prevents all effects of attacks done to the Pokemon it is attached to. Unknown G attaches itself as a tool card. So this is just really good if you're worried about effects of attacks, mainly things like Blazikins, Luring Flame, bringing your Claydol active, or if you have the worries of your opponent trapping something active and then using Ambipom G's tail code to move the energy off, especially against SP decks. Effects are really relevant. If you're playing against Gardevoir, you can use the Unknown G to block the effects of its bring down attack, if it can use that. So that is very good. There has been plays in the past where I've used Claydol to sink a hit for 60 in a Flygon deck and then guarded it so they could not use their bring down attack the entire game after that because the Claydol would just block it. So there's a lot of applications for Unknown G. I'd be here talking all day about all of them, but just know it's a very good card. We have our supporters next. That is a lot of Pokemon. We have 4 copies of Roseanne's Research. Again, basic search that we were talking about earlier. There it is. Search your deck for 2 in a combination of basic Pokemon and basic energy cards and put them into your hand. So just really good for getting your basic Pokemon out early. I've seen a lot of decks play Pokemon Collector, but I just don't agree with it. Pokemon Collector finds 3 basic Pokemon, and there is some things you can do, add some basics to the decks like Unknown Q to help out with retreating, and there's all kinds of interesting basics you can maybe add in that case. But just generally, this deck has a lot of setup, and in any kind of setup deck, especially with Spiritomb, it just feels so good to have Roseanne's be able to find your basic energy throughout the game to keep the attachments up, because if you can build 2 Tyranitars in a game, you're probably winning that game. We have 4 copies of BB Search here, some nice shiny ones. Hopefully these don't get absolutely destroyed on the lighting on the camera. I just had these extras, so I figured why not, we'll throw them here. 4 copies of BB Search, choose a card from your hand, put it on top of your deck, then search your deck for a Pokemon. So essentially this is an all-purpose Pokemon search, probably the best supporter in this format in terms of being used in pretty much every deck. So we have lots of Pokemon we need to find, like Exploud and Whismur and Tyranitar and Pupitar, that can't be found as easily by Roseanne's. Also Claydol, Spiritomb, things like that. Whatever you need, babies can get it. We have 3 copies of Judge. Now, this is a pretty unique supporter to my list, but I kind of want to explain my reasons behind it and why we don't play the other supporters that I've seen people play. So Judge forces each player to shuffle their hand and draw 4 cards. Nice hand disruption card. This is especially relevant in this deck for a few reasons. One, against Gyarados, we want to be able to threaten a knockout plus disruption, even if it is not going to get them away from getting the next Gyarados. It's going to try to prevent them from gusting and from hitting more damage by comboing lots of damage modifiers in their hand. So lowering their hand size is pretty much always good. And mainly against SP decks is very good, because against SP decks you can play your Judge and then they don't have Power Spray in hand anymore, that item that we're talking about that they can play to cancel your Poke Powers. If you need to get a Claydol off in an emergency, throw that Judge at them and pray they don't have a Cosmic Power on the other side. I've also just found that this deck can set up pretty well with Judge. Slowing down the opponent definitely helps. You could definitely run Professor Oak's New Theory in here. That is what I've seen a lot of lists running. Professor Oak's New Theory is just a flat shuffle draw 6. Either way, it doesn't really matter what you give to Gardevoir. Most decks are very afraid of giving Judge to Gardevoir, but once you have your board set up with this deck, it really does not matter what you're giving to them, because at that point you're just set up, as long as they're not using it to like deck you out, but you have to play pretty badly for that to happen. So Professor Oak's New Theory is another great card, shuffle draw 6. If you just want the most consistent setup, that is it, but you can't force Claydol Power Sprays with it, which I think is a little bit lacking. I just want to be able to slow my opponent down a little while I'm smacking them for as much damage as possible. I found that SP can be pretty hard to deal with if you're not disrupting their hand. They could chain a lot of the most broken effects in their deck over and over again with Poke Turn, and that's why we have to make it a little bit harder on them. So 3 copies of Judge, very nice. I would not advocate for playing Cynthia's Feelings. That was in the Jay Hornung list that was posted a couple years ago on YouTube. Cynthia's Feelings is a card that shuffles and draws 4, but draws 8 if you are knocked out. The entire point of this deck, once we are set up, is to not get knocked out, and we do not want to draw 8 cards once we're set up either, because then we're going to deck ourselves out. So would not recommend Cynthia's Feelings. There's some other supporters I'm sure you could probably play, but I think Judge or Professor Oak's New Theory are the 2 best ones. We play 4 copies of Rare Candy. Now this is a little high for these kind of decks. Usually these slower Spiritomb decks with 3 copies of Spiritomb are going to play 3 copies of Rare Candy, because they're going to be behind item lock most of the time. I'm just playing the 4th one here. You can definitely debate this. This allows us to kind of consistently get a sneaky stage 2 in there. If you have a stage 2 in your opening hand before you're into Spiritomb, you can set that up with a rare candy. Anything to help us get these stage 2s in play. Also, you can use this to rare candy into the stage 1 Pupitar. Because remember, rare candy back then was not restricted by the turn 1 rules. You can evolve into a stage 1 or stage 2 on the first turn of the game, or the turn you played a Pokemon. So we can have a Larvitar active, rare candy into a Pupitar, and now we have free retreat, and we can get an attachment on that Pupitar and save the attachment. So lots of uses for rare candy. I could see going down to 3 if you really need another slot in the deck. That's fine. We have 2 copies of Warp Point. Warp Point forces each player to switch their Pokemon when they get to choose, so it's kind of like escape rope if you play it nowadays. This is just good because we want to put extra pressure on with Tyranitar, allowing us to smack guys that are less important. We don't have Gust in a like choosable form, but sometimes it's nice to be able to choose something else to make it a little bit harder on your opponent. It's also really good if your opponent tries to trap you, especially Claydol can be trapped very easily. We want to have that Warp Point around to get him out. So it's just worth saying that Warp Point's very good. Stefan Tobacco's list did play the 3 copies of Pokemon Reversal, and I definitely understand what he's going for there, because there's really nothing scarier than a Tyranitar that can smack 120 on anything on your board. In my personal opinion, I played the deck, and I just found myself way too hampered by them when setting up. So many of my games, even favorable matchups, would end because I just kept on Claydolling into pieces of Gust. I did swap the reversals out for Poke Blowers because I'm bad at flipping coins, so guaranteed Gust, but even then you're just drawing them. I never even Gusted a single time because I didn't want to. I just wanted to set up and play the game instead. So that's why we're running Warp Point. We have 1 copy of Pokemon Communication, put a Pokemon from your hand on top of your deck, and then search your deck for a Pokemon. Just a good Pokemon search. If you want to bump up this count and lower maybe the rare candy count, that's fine. But with the fact we are in a very heavy Spiritomb deck, I think it's very good having just very low item search. So I'm only play 2 copies of item search. Other one is Luxury Ball. Search your deck for a Pokemon level X, or Pokemon excluding level X, sorry, and show it to your opponent, put it into your hand. In this deck, we don't play anything that is level X, so search the whole deck for whatever Pokemon you want. Pretty broken, but you cannot use it if you have another one in your discard pile, so we can only run 1, conceivably. 1 copy of Night Maintenance. This is a very grisly Night Maintenance destroyed card. We love those here in our retro scene. Search your discard pile for up to 3 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy. Shuffle them into your deck. So basically like Super Rod, literally like Super Rod. And this is just really good for a recovery card because we might deck out, and because you know, pieces are important. If we lose our 1-ofs, we want to be able to get them back pretty soon. The biggest thing I will say with this card is you often, if you find the card just drawing when you're setting up, you just want to hold on to this card the whole game as long as your board is going fine. Obviously don't jeopardize your game to hold the card, but if you can hold the card so that your Tyranitar discards don't punish you as much, remember Megaton Tail discards top 3 cards of your own deck. If you can hold on to Night Maintenance and just make it a little bit less painful, if at any point you can need to shuffle back, you know, energy, or maybe you mill your Nidoqueen line that you need to win the game, it's good to hold it in your hand if at all possible. So 1 copy is pretty good. 2 copies of Expert Belt. Expert Belt is very good in this deck. I could argue playing a 3rd one, honestly. However, generally, you just want to belt your Tyranitars. Just get 2 Tyranitars out, belt them both, and you're going. But you can play 3 just for the more likelihood of finding it by drawing. Expert Belt boosts the Pokemon's HP, its attack to by 20, and it makes their attacks do 20 more damage. However, they give up 1 more prize card. This really isn't an issue for us, as I said. So in a decent game, you're going to give up 3 prize cards before you set up. And in that case, you will have your opponent will have 3 prizes left to take. You're going to show them Tyranitars that give up 2 prizes each, but are very hard to knock out, and they're going to have to knock out 1 of those Tyranitars at the very least, and an Exploud or a Nidoqueen, something like that. You can also just even give them single prize Tyranitars and force them to knock out your whole board if you don't need that extra damage against something like Luxchomp, which is just, it's just a crazy thing. Like, they're just not going to have a good time trying to get through Tyranitar Prime with Exploud removing weakness. 2 copies of Moonlight Stadium. Moonlight Stadium is a stadium that, believe it or not, reduces the retreat cost of Psychic and Dark Pokemon to 0. So even our big Tyranitar Prime and our big Nidoqueen can retreat for free. That's why we play the Psychic Baltoy. It's why we're able to so easily pivot back into Spirit Tomb. This is really a focus of the deck. Try to play these guys. If there was a Psychic Larvitar, we'd play Psychic Larvitar to get free retreat too. You just want to be able to pivot into that Spirit Tomb whenever possible, and being able to switch between Tyranitars while your Nidoqueen heals them off against a deck like Gyarados is a really, really strong play. You know, get 3 Tyranitars on board at once, get the Nidoqueen to start healing them, and force the Gyarados to have a gust while you're disrupting their hand with Judge. Just a really powerful play. So I think 2 Moonlight Stadium is good. If you cut the Nidoqueen line, I could see cutting the Moonlight Stadium, but I still don't hate having it. You know, there's not really a stadium you need to play otherwise. Having it's nice. 4 copies of Darkness Energy. Got the nice Umbreon one on top, since why not? I only have 1, might as well use it. 4 copies of Basic Dark. We can find this with the Roseanne's research. You'll see the list with Machamp run Rainbow Energy, so they get to attack with Machamp and Nidoqueen if they play it. Personally, I think I don't really care about attacking with Nidoqueen. We don't even put it down most of the games if we don't need it. And Tyranitar's attacks are more than strong enough. So let's just have Dark Energy that we can find with our Roseanne so we can get our T-Tars built up. Next up, we have 4 copies of Special Darkness Energy. This is an interesting energy card that, if it's attached to a Dark Pokemon, makes its attacks do 10 more damage. So this is really good on Tyranitar. There's some key numbers, especially boosting that 3rd attack from 120 to 130. That means you're not going to be taking a knockout on Gardevoir level X, or an Expert Belt to boost a Gardevoir, or a Gyarados with 130, and then you have an Expert Belt on top of that. You're hitting 150. Now you're getting Expert Belted, boosted Gallade and Gardevoir level X. Now you're getting Gyarados with an Expert Belt. You can knock out quite a lot with 150 damage, and you can even put more Darkness Energy on there. The effect stacks, so if you need to hit 160 on, let's just say, a Torterra, add another Darkness Energy. And then finally, we have 4 copies of Double Colorless Energy. Pays the 2 Colorless Energy at cost. This is very good for Tyranitar. Obviously, we need 2 Colorless Energy for his attack, and Exploud also uses 2 Colorless Energy, but it can also be used to retreat the Claydol. Because we don't play any energy to attack with Nidoqueen, you're not going to be attacking with Nidoqueen ever, but you can also use this to retreat the Queen if need be, but Moonlight Stadium is probably just what you're using to retreat the Nidoqueen, as long as you haven't milled all of them. This has been Tyranitar Prime. This is definitely not the beginner's deck. I definitely do not think, if it's even in your first, like, 8 decks for the format, I don't think you're on the right track. You should probably build something else. It's definitely a tier 2 deck, maybe even tier 2.5, because it has tough matchups against some of the more popular meta decks, like GGAMU and Dialga-Chomp, but I do think it has some fun matchups against decks like Luxchomp Varians and Gardevoir and Gyarados that still keeps it somewhat playable for a tournament meta. Shout out to Stefan Tobacco for winning the online webcam tournament with Tyranitar a while back, really giving it some proof to me that it had some legs in a competitive environment. So, really cool deck. Like I said, if you don't really know the format, probably not the first deck for you. You probably want to figure out the flow of the format so you know what you're doing with this deck. This deck is not entirely, it's not difficult to play, but it's also not easy to play. If you don't know what you're doing, you can definitely mess things up for yourself. So thank you all so much for watching this in-depth deck profile. Give it a try. Thank you.